Hello and welcome to another SolidWorks how-to video. In this video, I want to walk through the sort of basics of creating an animation for an assembly. And I have an assembly open here. This is actually an assembly I created while taking the SolidWorks Certified Professional test, rather. Um, and the questions on the test, and you'll have to take the test to sort of figure out how this thing goes together. I don't want to get into that, and I don't want to run afoul of sort of their copyrights. But offhand, as I was thinking of doing this video, this was sort of the only assembly I had that was animatable. Generally, especially with students, I go through and I sort of teach the students SolidWorks in a way that in most applications, we sort of want our models or our assemblies to be completely locked down, fully constrained so they can't move. Um, and therefore, if an assembly can't move, there's nothing to animate, right? Animation sort of implies that something is going to move. So given that all my, previous tutorial models are all locked down, I can't do that. So I grabbed this one. Thing is, this one is locked down too because the last state I left it in after taking that test. So right now, this piston should sort of, in a real world application, I should be able to drag this and move it back and forth kind of freely, right? And it'll move the linkage. Um, I do believe one of the questions on the test asked for distance or something, angles. I forget exactly what was going on here, but the thing locking this down is this distance. So the piston in this cylinder is distanced to the bottom of the cylinder right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and right click that and delete that mate. And as soon as I do, I'm now free to sort of move this back and forth. Now, there's now nothing, whoop, and we can see sort of it losing its mind as we, overextend. There's sort of nothing now constraining this at all. I can pull it out and let's see if I can get it to break again. Yeah, there we go. So it sort of loses its mind the further I go out, right? Um, and back this way as well. So we one of the things with animation, we sort of break the rule. We need things to move. So my sort of go-to rule of fully constraining everything doesn't really apply if we want the assembly to move. But what I do always recommend, and I'm about to do it here, is I do always recommend setting sort of min and max distances so that you don't get into this situation where you can see my screen sort of jumping around as I drag, right? For instance, in this case, I don't want this piston to be able to leave the cylinder body. I also don't want it to be able to go through the back of the cylinder body like you can see here. So I'm going to go ahead and set some mates to sort of restrain that. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just add simple mates, right? Assembly mate. And I know I'm going to use distance mates to start with. And actually, I need to go to the advanced tab because I want a min and a max over here on the left in my feature tree. And I need to deselect that face. So I'm going to select the bottom of the piston, right? Right now it's set to an inch. That doesn't matter so much where it's at right now. But min, I want to set to 0. And max, I'm going to set to, let's say, 10 inches. Enter. And I'm going to rotate so I can hopefully get to the bottom of the cylinder. There we go. So notice that it moved, and it moved because that current distance here in this field is an inch. So that should be an inch away right now. And if I accept that, and I'm going to get out of mate so I can move, if I now drag this, I should be able to go, well, 10 inches out if it'll let me, but should stop. See, it'll stop at 0. So that's the point at which it reaches the back of that cylinder. So that's the sort of thinking I recommend. Rather than constraining it to a distance, constrain it unless you need to measure distance, which apparently in my case, when I was taking that test, I needed to do that. But you can use the distance mate with limits to sort of set up hard stops. So it now won't go past the end of that cylinder. I'm going to do a very similar setup for the other end of the piston. I'm going to mate. This time I'm going to mate these two faces, this upper face of the piston and this upper face of the cylinder. I also want to go to advanced and set a distance mate. I do want to flip it so that it's inside. And again, I'm going to go 0 so that it won't ever come out of the cylinder body. Maybe I don't want to flip it. There we go. might take some tweaking. I can set it to 10 again because the other condition will keep it from going out the back end. So if I set it that way, I shouldn't be able to come out. So now I'm sort of constrained. I can move it wherever I want within that cylinder, but now it's locked back and forth, locked back and forth to my model. And I'm just going to shrink things over here just for the sake of sort of tidiness. But so now I'm locked. I can't come out the end. I can't go back through the body of that cylinder. So we're locked down in that sense. So animations then. Now that I have an assembly that actually has some motion that is possible, how do I animate? The sort of simplest way for quick animations in SolidWorks, and that's really most of what I worry about when I want an animation is just the quick version. I'm sure SolidWorks has an add-in software called SolidWorks Visualize, which I'm sure has some more photorealistic rendering options and all that kind of stuff. But for sort of the basic animation, just to get an idea of how something moves, what we really want is down at the bottom left, we have a tab called Motion Study, and this is where our animation lives. So what this basically is an animation timeline, and we can move things around, we can turn things on and off, we can do all sorts of things, and the key here is going to be based on this idea, this thing that's checked that says auto key. We don't need that, and sometimes you do want to turn it off, but for the most part, I leave it on. And that means that as we sort of move our timeline for our animation, and we click something, let's say I move this cylinder, notice that it created a key at that time because I moved my cylinder. If I go out, move this timeline to 4.5 seconds and drag, it creates a keyframe. So what that will do, if I go ahead and hit play, you will actually see it move to wherever that final position was by the amount of time that I had previously set. So I'm going to undo that and get rid of everything. And that's sort of really the simplest way that we can create animations here. And it's very easy to do. The other thing we can do is we can also play around with zooming and lights. So for instance, if I want to take 3 seconds to zoom in on this model, right? It's kind of far away. So if I click on orientation, I need to enable view key creation. Let's click on orientation and zoom in, and notice I got a key frame here now. So if I zoom in, and that's because that auto key was checked. If I had this button turned off, I would have to manually create the keys, which isn't a huge deal. You can certainly do that, and sometimes, especially with complicated assemblies or with sometimes the animation will make assumptions about what you want to move, and it'll move some things that you didn't quite want to move. Sometimes you do want to create manual keys, but for the most part, it's pretty good at just doing its thing, right? Creating the auto keys, as long as you remember to move your timeline along. So let's go ahead and play that, and we can see now we've got a 3 second zoom, right? So now if I move, say, my part out a second, my timeline out a second later, move that line out. Now if I drag out to the end, I get a key for this piston out here at, what is that, 4.5 seconds. If I go out another second and drag it back in, I get another key out here. And if I go out another second, drag it back out, and I'm just going to repeat this one more time just so that we've got some motion in our animation, drag it back in. And if I play that, we should have a zoom. Once it's done zooming, we've got a couple of slides in and out of the piston. So that is really all there is to creating a basic animation in SolidWorks. Like I said, we can do a lot of other things to sort of tweak. We can rotate all kinds of the things, especially if I played with the view, the camera view, and whatnot. There's also options like we could delay certain actions from happening. Like notice it got a little jumpy there between the end of the zoom. We could put a small delay in just by forcing a keyframe. So for instance, if I come back here, I can also manually create a key here. Key, I'm going to do it for all of the parts that move. Notice I got sort of automatic lines here. Even though I didn't move them myself, it created animation lines for each one of the parts in the assembly that's actually moving. So now if I play it, I just right clicked here at this timeline and manually placed those keys. So now let's stop and go back to the beginning. Now, if I play, now that they're all fixed, we should have been a little smoother than that. We can also click all of these and move them wherever we'd like. So let's move them and drag them a little bit just so that they're sitting in space. And let's play again from the beginning. And we should have a pause, a brief pause now before it moves. And let's try that. And then at the end, let's take the extra couple of seconds and let's go back up to my orientation and zoom back out. Now, usually, I'm going to zoom back out to where we started. Usually, well, first, remember, especially with views, we want to make sure that well, first, let's delete this key. And we want to make sure, especially with views, the manual key creation is important, which is what I forgot. So we want to place a key here for the view. Otherwise, let me not do that. And so no view. So what I had done and what I realized is if I zoom out here, it's going to take whatever I did and spread it out over this from key to key. That's a crucial detail here. So it'll spread that zoom out from the very beginning all the way out. So basically what we should see is once it zooms all the way in at this keyframe, it will zoom all the way out to this keyframe over that entire animation. So it's zooming in and then it'll start to pull out. See, it's starting to move backwards. So especially with views, it's important to sort of manually create those keyframes. So I'm going to pop back. Well, actually, I can just delete that end key. I can go back here and then come here and manually create the key, place a key, and then I can move my timeline out and zoom back out and play from beginning. We should zoom in, we will get our motion. And then at the end of the motion, it should start to zoom back out. So there we go. Now we have the motion, we can see it move. How to get it out of SolidWorks is pretty simple. We can save the animation and it gives us a couple of different types. In my opinion, they're a little bit behind the times. AVI files aren't used much anymore. MP4s are much more common nowadays. But we've got all the options here. Frames per second, this kind of stuff. These are the things that are really going to take more time to process, even though this is a fairly simple model. So for instance, if I use 30 frames per second, which is sort of, considered the bottom of the barrel, most games and things would run 60 nowadays at least. But for an animation this simple, 30 is fine. But if I save this, yes, we want to recalculate. It's just going to go through and recalculate the position of all the things. It'll run through the animation and then it'll actually process and output video for us. And again, it's doing it at 30 frames per second. So we should get something output that is relatively smooth, especially for such a simple assembly. So let it do that. It finishes. And we should have, if I switch now, if I switch to my, let's see, that one I think was in downloads. I have a video, and this is the video we ended up with. So not too terrible, fairly quick to create. Again, the key is going to be to, well, one, the key is to not fully constrain your model. And notice one thing that I didn't do there, that in a, playing around with longer versions, one thing, it starts zooming in immediately. It would have been better if I'd have moved sort of the whole timeline over and given it some buffer on the front end and also the back end. The video drops out pretty immediately, right? As soon as that keyframe is done, the video drops out. So those are things to play with. That can be changed just by adding another, say, 2-second keyframe here, sliding everything over. Um, and in fact, we should be able to just select all of these and all of this. And if I were to select this and sort of drag it all over, let's go to 6 seconds. And let's go here. Let's not go here. Let's go back to 0. And I want to move this out. So our zoom now is 2 seconds into the video. So that would be like an intro 2 seconds, right? We don't want the camera to just fly in as soon as the video starts, right? And then out here, stop the video. I'm going to add another sort of buffer amount of time before the video ends, just to give us, so we add a key, even though this key is the same as this key, I'm going to add it out here just to place a key so that SolidWorks knows that the video needs to be that long. So now, when we zoom in, we'll go through the animation. Now, the actual animation timeline didn't change. I just selected everything and drug it over. And we can go in and we can add motions in the middle. We can add keyframes wherever we'd like, all of that. But this key out here just sort of gives us a buffer at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and save that video again as an MP4. Make sure I closed the one that I had open. Did I? I did. So MP4, 30 frames per second, everything's fine. Save, yes, overwrite, yes, allow it to recalculate. You don't always have to allow it to recalculate. It's a good idea just to make sure that everything's the latest, that everything's been refreshed. But it's now going through and creating those frames again, 30 of them every second, and processing those, and it'll output them as a video. And once that get done, we'll open it up and see how it looks a little better having buffer space sort of at the beginning and the end of the video. That might be a little long, but again, these are all things that we can tweak. Give it a second to finish processing. There's our little indicator sound. Now, if I switch back to my downloads, I should have. So we've got a nice delay before the camera just sort of flies in, which is good. That's what we want. Extend, retract, do that a couple of times. And then zoom back out. We should have a buffer before the video just sort of cuts off. So again, fairly simple, fairly quick, especially with sort of a simple assembly to create an animation in SolidWorks, and kind of handy too. It gives us an idea of, if this was a much more complicated device, it gives us an idea of if things are moving the way we think they are. For instance, I mean, this is a pretty simple scissor, and I'm going to screw up. No, now the part of the problem is right now, this is updating my my view. So if I want to be able to move this around, and notice if I click anywhere, say, and I do what I just did and start talking and I forget, and I start to zoom out, notice I got a keyframe there now. It dropped a keyframe here. So in order to sort of avoid, let's zoom back out. In order to sort of avoid, you can either turn off this auto key. So if I turn the auto key off and move this timeline, I can zoom in and out and nothing happens. Let's go back and turn that back on. The other thing, once you no longer want to sort of play with the animation, if you want to just look at the model again, remember to switch back to the model tab. Once I'm back on the model tab, I can move it all around. Everybody's happy. I can leave it in a kind of sort of goofy direction. When I go back to my motion study, it'll pop it back to where it left off. So important if you want to sort of play with the model again to go back to the model tab. That way we don't risk screwing up any of the work we've done on the actual animation. So hopefully that was helpful. Quick and easy lesson in how to create very simple animations in SolidWorks. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future CAD video.